I wasn't interested in politics growing up. In fact, words like parliament were used to describe general bad behavior. Like when your class teacher would burst into your previously unattended classroom and find everyone out of their seats and shouting, and she'd say, "Do you think that you are in parliament?" Or our Sunday family lunches. Anybody who knows us would know that these were noisy, overcrowded events filled with highly opinionated people. As my eyes would grow, as these conversations would inevitably devolve into loud discussions with everyone speaking over each other and absolutely nobody hearing anything anyone was saying, my nana would look at me and say, "Bedal Parliament." In fact, it was perhaps only 10 years ago that I began to develop an interest in politics. I think I might have been the only person in my entire sixth form to actually love systems of knowledge. I began to follow a number of political columns and opinion pieces. I read Rafael Vassallo's, I read Mario De Marco's, Everest Bartolo's, and of course Daphne Caruana Galizia's. Then came Daphne's blog, and her writing was different. It was sharp, it was witty, sometimes it was really funny. Sometimes it wasn't funny at all, and it was really hard and unrelenting. But as the years passed and scandals increased, Daphne's writing became more focused, and I remember reading her and thinking, my God, somebody one day is going to kill her. And I know that this wasn't a comment that was said by myself alone. It was actually a comment that was repeated by a lot of people who read her. But on reflection, wasn't this such a crazy thing to say? Wasn't it madness that in a country the size of a small European city, we actually thought that a journalist was at risk of being murdered for her political writings? And I have to say, no, it wasn't. Daphne wrote about corruption and bad political behavior on a near constant basis. Yet what was done about it? Nothing, or very rarely anything. It was like there was a kink in the chain. Instead of Daphne's reporting setting off a criminal investigation, or perhaps at the very least political or social repercussions, perhaps social ostracization for being a criminal, there would be a pushback. But it was against Daphne and not the people she was writing about. Daphne became the enemy, and it didn't happen overnight. It took 30 long years of careful crafting, of careful rhetoric, 30 years of serious public complacency. It was 30 years of libel suits, of blurring the lines between politician and journalist, 30 years of harassment and dehumanization, until ultimately, no matter what Daphne wrote, it was regarded as a lie, as jealousy. Ħdura għax kienet saħħara mdejqa. So effective was this campaign of hatred that on the 16th October 2017, when Daphne Caruana Galizia was ultimately murdered, there were people who actually went cockading. And here lies my problem. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a socialist at heart. I believe in equality. I believe in a robust welfare system. I believe that good and free education is the foundations for eradicating poverty. I believe in women's rights, and I believe in justice and fairness. And so, I am angry. I'm angry and I am so disappointed in the behavior of this government. When Daphne Caruana Galizia was assassinated, this country hit rock bottom. Daphne was assassinated outside her home with her son sitting just a few hundred meters away from her. Daphne's murder should have turned this country on its head. The moment Daphne was killed, our Minister for Justice and Culture should have turned Parliament on its head in order to push through those reforms to make sure that journalists had serious and real protection in order to do their work in safety. The moment Daphne Caruana Galizia was executed, the Minister for Education, Evariste Bartolo, should have overhauled the academic curriculum to ensure that the next generation of students grow up understanding basic human rights. Understanding that freedom of speech is a right that is protected by the European Convention of Human Rights. Upon seeing the reaction of people to her murder, he should have launched the biggest national campaign to re-educate this population so that maybe one day we will understand the true meaning of media in supporting a democracy. Upon her murder, our Minister of Finance, Edward Cicluna, should have bitten the bullet and he should have demanded financial reforms to tighten the noose around the necks of those who will use our hard-earned financial jurisdiction to launder their dirty money. He should have pushed for the Economics Crimes Unit to be better equipped to really handle the likes of the cases repeatedly flagged by Daphne in the months prior to her murder. What did we have instead? Owen Bonnici chose to literally sweep away any sign of protest at Daphne's murder. Incredulously, protests were suddenly and illegally limited by a 24-hour time bar. The Minister for Justice and Culture would do well to remember that culture is not limited to art hanging in museums, and that a nation's culture is built on its values. A nation that protests against the murder of a journalist is a nation that is in touch with its democratic values. And this is a culture that Minister Owen Bonnici is duty-bound to protect. In the aftermath of Daphne's murder, the Shift News Online revealed online trolling groups that coordinated vicious attacks on government opponents. Despite the government's greatest critic having been murdered just months before, various members of government remain members of this group, having learned absolutely nothing from her murder. Not a single ounce of responsibility has been shouldered for Daphne Caruana Galizia's murder. Our Prime Minister has yet to understand the role that he and his government played in her death. For even if we were to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, and despite the onslaught of corruption allegations against him, his Chief of Staff and his ministers, we were to say, you know what, innocent until proven guilty, we can't say anything. Responsibility must still be had for creating an environment which allowed a journalist to be murdered on Maltese soil. Because Daphne was not murdered in a vacuum. Her execution in times of peace demands to be treated with the seriousness it deserves. It demands to be investigated to understand how and why it was allowed to happen in a European country. Unfortunately, this government has shown that it has no interest in righting its wrongs. Rather, Daphne's murder has led to a free-for-all in this country. The nation's niggling conscience has finally been silenced. Impunity, corruption, and nepotism are at an all-time high. And where's the opposition in all of this, I hear you ask? Napping? Save for the obvious few, they're either napping or busy defending the leader or the MPs from accusations of money laundering, of tax dodging, accusations of domestic abuse, and most recently, bad judgment calls. You'd think it would go without saying, but then again, here I am, standing on this podium. Every resource spent by the PN defending itself is one resource from an already depleted pool that should be focusing on government scrutiny. The opposition has literally one job, and that is to scrutinize the government and provide an alternative. And in this regard, it is failing. Why is this a problem? Why can't we just shut up about it and let the opposition waddle its way through its messes? Because we need someone somewhere to say that this is not normal behavior, that corruption is a problem that affects all of us. Because what's the alternative? What lessons are being taught over here? That you don't have to work hard and you don't have to follow the rules because you can just pay someone off and you can get what you want anyway. That you can commit crimes and as long as you have friends in high places, you're going to get off scot-free and see, you might even get a promotion. That if you don't like what someone says about you, you can have them killed and nothing will happen to you. No one will even bother to investigate you. What sort of example is this? And what sort of faith are young people supposed to have in the institutions that are designed to protect us if every serious investigation into corruption ends before it even begins? What sort of faith are we meant to have if every act of public dissent will have you branded as a traitor and risk having your private information and your face shared on online trolling groups, calling for your lynching? Heck, our human rights don't count as long as the country is making money. This behavior needs to be denounced. And it's not the opposition's role to be positive, no matter what Mrs. Muscat might say about the opposition and the media. So it falls to civil society to demand better. Yes, it is scary to stick your neck out, of course it is. We know that a lot of people don't come to protest because they're afraid of the backlash. We know that even giant powerhouses of firms, financial and legal, instruct their employees, don't go to protest, don't speak out, not even online, because they're afraid that they will lose out on tenders and on income, and then how are you meant to pay for your employees? Of course it's a serious problem. We know that persons of trust engaged by the government have singled out individual protesters and have called for a boycotting of their business. Yes, it's a risk, it's scary. But ladies and gentlemen, if your livelihood and your income is dependent on your silence too and your submission to a corrupt government and the murder of a journalist, then let's face it, this is a tyranny. Don't tell me that this is the best of times. So it's time to be brave. It's time to stop counting our euros. It's time to recover a little bit of national pride. It's time to demand some standards, to stand up and say enough. Enough. Not in our name, and never, ever again. Thank you.